The first scent Rule knew that morning was the cold iron of the knife. It had slept on the walnut board beside the window, a thin seam of moonlight along its spine, and he felt its chill through the rag when he lifted it. The kitchen was still, the coals banked like sleeping eyes beneath ash, and the river fog lay so thick against the panes that the dawn looked like milk. He could feel the day watching him from the other side of that fog, measuring whether he would bend beneath it or move like a reed and keep his root. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. He set the blade to the whetstone and drew metal over roughness until it sang a thin, steady note. He kept time with his breath, with the pulse that lived beneath the scar on his left wrist, the old ring mark that was more memory than pain now. The blade had his reflection in it when he lifted it toward the fogged glass. A narrow face, high cheeks, the unshorn dark of his hair bound in a cloth so it would not fall in the stew. A mouth that did not often speak when white ears were near, and eyes that learned from watching what knives, ledgers, rings, and ropes intended. Sibby, the cook, stirred in her sleep on the pallet by the cold hearth. Her gray head turned on the folded quilt, and a whisper of air fled her lips. "You up, boy," she said without waking, and then the breath turned to a light snore that made Rule smile despite himself. The kitchen had been Sibby's kingdom since before he remembered his mother's voice, and he had learned early to move in it like smoke, seen only when it pleased him. He roused the coals with a spoon and fed them with split hickory, then the narrow sticks that smoked sweet. When the fire caught, the room turned from pewter to copper, shadows hopping like small animals along the rough plank walls. The first boil of the kettle rose, a distant sea and tin, and he set beans to soak and onions to sweat. He split honey with vinegar, he laid out rosemary sprigs like green teeth to dry by the hearth. Each sound had its meaning, each click of lid, each soft thud of pestle, like letters in a script no one else saw. Rule had a penknife he kept wrapped in cheesecloth under the flour bin. No one knew. Not Sibby, not Mira who did the wash in the yard and had once patched his shirt with quiet hands, not old Benaiah in the smithy who had traded him a scrap of metal for a story about the river barge he'd helped unload. The little knife had a brass rivet missing near the hinge, and the horn of its handle had cracked in the summer heat last year, but it cut the same. He used it not for food but for letters he carved in the spill board behind the smokehouse door, where grease stained the pine and mice sometimes skittered. He carved them shallow, so the lines would fill with soot and vanish into the black when anyone looked too quick. It had begun with crate marks, Savannah, Biloxi, N. Orleans burned into pine slats, and then labels on sacks, rice and O. Indigo, sugar, words like trapped birds. Sibby had laughed at him once when he asked after the letters on a jar, molasses, fool child, that the master's baby like in her mush, but later she had brought him a coal ash twig and said, "Trace, if you must. Do your tracing where eyes ain't." That was the way of things, permission shielded as rebuke, care disguised as scold. He traced, and he learned, and he listened when the white mouths spoke at table. Rule was the carver because his hands were steady. He had been tall before he was 16, and his wrists stayed slim even as his knuckles knotted with work. To carve the roast, Sibby said, is not to cut it like wood, it is to speak to it the way a man speaks to a skittish colt, calm, sure, promising no harm and meaning it until it is time to mean otherwise. The blade needed to be an extension of breath. It needed to arrive and leave without noise. At the big table in the great room it was the only time Rule was invited among them, standing at an angle to the head of the table, the silver platter beneath the beef or pork slick with its own fat, the linen like snow, the candles blooming along the center like caught stalks of wheat. He would cut the first slices thin and even, set them like shingles on the serving plate, and he would listen while the master and his neighbors talked. They called the place Vance's Ferry because the river made a bend there and there used to be a skiff held on ropes that could take wagons across when the bottom road flooded. The ferry rope still lay like a dead snake at the waterline, and boys from the quarters sometimes found the frayed tail and drug it up to swing from, which drew a snap and a curse from the overseer, Rake Hardy, who said he'd split any hand he caught touching the river line. Superstition, he'd say, and spit, as if the rope could make a boy into something he feared. Caleb Vance ruled the house. He wore a clean beard trimmed square to his jaw, kept a pocket watch from Philadelphia in his waistcoat, and had eyes the color of rainwater, a pale gray without warmth. His wife Aurelia kept her hair pinned tight and wore dresses of silk that made a sound like a gentle hush when she walked through the hall. She had a smile that could make the baby laugh, and the same smile could be a blade turned flat when she spoke to Mira about a missed spot in the stair carpet. It was Aurelia who said, the first time Rule carved at table, "See how fine his hand moves, Caleb," and the master had glanced up only long enough to say, "Useful steadiness," as if that were a tool's trait and not a person's. Useful steadiness would keep a man alive. That was what Rule had seen, what he had learned even before the ring around his wrist had been hammered off in the smithy, because Aurelia said she could not bear the clink of it when he came near the baby's room. Useful steadiness could make a man's body a quiet carriage for whatever else needed carrying. But useful steadiness could hide things, too. Hidden things required practice. And today the hidden thing was this: Rule had read the ledger. He had not read all of it, only the page that lay open on the desk in Mr. Vance's office when he went in with Benaiah to move the heavy mirror from the wall. The mirror had a gilt edge with carved grape leaves and small bitter-looking cherubs. Aurelia had said it wanted the southern light. Benaiah had taken one end and Rule the other, and Rule had meant to keep his face turned to the wall because you never know what shows in a mirror besides a face, but his eyes had landed on the page because a small line of ribbon stuck up like a snake's tongue, and something in him always followed the movement of paper. His eyes did what they had learned. They turned scratch into sense. They assembled the marks into words. 4th Saturday, shipment to Natchez. 8 prime. 3 field, 2 coopers, 1 boy, 1 woman, 1 houseman, to be split before winter. A small blot at the end where the pen had hesitated. Rule did not know whether Mr. Vance had hesitated, but the pen had. The letters lay inside him like a hot coal after that. Split before winter. Split like wood. Like a roast under a steady hand. He did not say anything to Benaiah. He did not let his breath change. When Aurelia came to see the mirror in the light and clapped her hands very softly and said, "Yes, yes, you see how the baby's curls glow now," he kept his eyes on the nail head he was tapping straight again. He did not look at the ledger. He did not need to. He had swallowed the words. In the yard later, Rule watched Mira wring linen over the tub, her hands red from lye. She had a way of keeping time with her jaw when she worked, a small grind of teeth that was part hum, part vow. The baby's nightshirts hung on the line like the ghosts of birds, fluttering. Rule wiped his hands and said, because he wanted to tell her something ordinary to push down the heat of what he knew, "You took the soot out fine. Miss Aurelia will like it." Mira pressed water from the cloth, took the next, turned it in the lye. She did not look up. "I don't set my clock by what she like," she said. But the day moved the same around her little face. "You coming to the quarters tonight?" "Maybe," Rule said. It meant yes. Benaiah mended a plowshare under the smithy shed. The ring of iron was like a clock in the place, steadying, relentless. Boys brought barrel hoops and old nails and made a game of sorting them by weight and shine, and sometimes Benaiah would let one strike the anvil to feel the bone-deep song of it. Rule liked that sound. He had learned to feel letters through that sound, as if sense had weight and could be hammered true if you kept the rhythm. That evening the quarters breathed together. The babies cried at the same hours and fell asleep when a certain lullaby moved from one cabin to the next like a breeze. Men came off the row with backs bent, salt dried at their hairlines like frost, and the women carried supper in fists and little wooden bowls, and someone tempted the night with a fiddle until Rake Hardy stepped close and let his boot scuff the doorframe by accident and the bow fell silent. It was better to keep songs in the soft of the chest when Rake prowled. Rake had a way of leaning so near a face that a man could count the tobacco grains in his teeth. He kept a short whip looped at his hip like an extra tail and cracked it when words pleased him, like punctuation. He was not large, but he wore his thinness like a blade, always an edge, never anything to blunt him. Rule kept a careful count of the times Rake came near him, and he kept his breath steady each time. They gathered behind the smokehouse on the windward side, where grease made the boards shine. The children squatted on their heels and drew pictures in the dirt with sticks. Sibby sat against the wall with her knees up and her hands tucked into her apron for warmth, though the night was not cold. Her hands were always cold now. "Say your verse," she told the little ones, and a girl recited something about a lamb and a wolf and a gate, and everyone said, because the verse ended with hope that had no proof. Rule slid the smokehouse door with his hip and stepped inside as if to fetch salt. He used the penknife and the edge of his thumbnail to clear the soot and the cuts he had made before, small letters that only showed when you knew where to look. He had carved names there: Benaiah, Mira, Sibby, Litfinch, each letter crooked to hide in the knots. And he had carved this, split B/4 winter. He trusted no one with that yet. He did not know what to do with it. He only knew he could not keep it all in his body without letting a line of it out into wood. When he slid the door back, he found Finch at his elbow, the boy with a bird's bones and eyes too big for his face. Finch looked past him into the smoke. "What you doing?" he whispered. Finch had a whisper like a leaf turning. "Hunting pepper," Rule said. It was enough. Finch nodded as if pepper grew on hooks in the dark and ran to stand on Sibby's foot and make her scold him softly. After the prayer, always quick, always plain, they talked about small things like they were large enough to hold back the river, a new crack in the well curb, a sore tooth, a pair of shoes that might be cut for the old man with the twisted foot. Benaiah listened with his eyes half closed and said, in a voice that made even Rake's shadow hold a little still, "A thing can be hidden a good long while and still be real as an axe head. The not seeing don't make it gone. The seeing don't make it yours. The taking, that the hard part." Mira watched Rule with that half-struck match look she had, like a spark lived under her tongue she might spit into tinder if the night was dry enough. When the talk turned to whether the new boy from the purchase in May had the mark on his cheek from whip or smallpox, she said, as if she were answering someone else, "A man writes something down, he think he made it true." Then she turned her face away and Rule saw the vein in her neck beat once, like a bird trapped behind skin. That night Rule could not sleep. The river fog had thinned and the sky wore a ragged crescent moon. He lay on his pallet in his corner of the kitchen and watched the door to the hall, and he thought of the ledger page like it was a living mouth that had spoken in his ear and then gone quiet. 8 prime. He counted people he knew and did not know who might be counted prime by a pale eye. He counted the small children too, because he had seen numbers cheat and include what no heart would. He thought of splitting. He thought of the way meat came apart beneath a blade that knew where the grain ran. He thought of how he could turn a knife without anyone hearing. In the morning the house woke like an instrument being tuned. The baby cried and then laughed and then cried again. Aurelia's steps measured the hall. Rule's fire caught slow, the wood still damp from the night river, and he coaxed it with breath until the skillet took heat. He browned pork for breakfast, beat eggs, toasted corn bread at the rim of the coals. When the sun finally slipped its blunt edge above the fog, the house glowed like a lantern from inside. The day brought visitors. It always did when the river fell after a heavy week. The bottom road would be passable and men would appear who lived like turtles farther down the bend, their hat brims curled with the memory of rain. Mr. Vance liked to have a full table when such men came. It made his voice fuller. It made his watch heavier when he set it beside his plate so the chain winked. Rule cleaned the silver. The carving knife and fork lived in a green felt sleeve sewn by Aurelia with careful little stitches Rule had once counted to learn steadiness in his eyes as well as his hands. He took the knife out and it lay like a quiet promise on the cloth, its bone handle rubbed to silk by other hands before his. He polished the blade with a square of linen until his face showed again, until the window showed, until the shape of the door warmed in the steel as Sibby passed behind him. "You shining that thing like it a mirror," she said. "A mirror tell you your face," Rule said. "A blade tell you your line." "You talk like Benaiah," Sibby said, but she smiled as she said it. She trusted only 3 kinds of talk: prayer plain enough to say over a child, gossip that could fix a problem, and parables the old smith spoke like he was dropping nails into a pocket. Anything else was just a man liking the sound of himself, and she had no time for that. The visitors arrived before noon, Mr. Parrish with his tobacco-brown teeth and Sunday coat that always had hayseed stuck to it, the Caldwell brothers, thin as fence rails and twice as mean, a quiet man Rule had not seen before who wore simple clothes but had boots that shone like a mirror, Natchez shine. Rule put his face down and kept his ears up. The quiet man set his hat on the hall table and smoothed the brim with his thumb as if it might blow away inside. "What brings you up the bend?" Mr. Vance asked the quiet man later, his voice a little too easy. The quiet man smiled a polite inch and said, "Accounts." He looked at Rule while he said it and then passed him as if Rule were part of the furniture. Rule knew better than to look back, but the word sat in his mouth and he chewed it once, tasting iron. Accounts, like ledger pages that could split a life with a line. At dinner they ate pork shoulder, slow-smoked, its fat rendered like honey. Rule carried the platter like it held more than meat. He stood at his place by the master's elbow and watched the flame tremble on the candles while voices braided and unbraided above the linen. He listened. Words about river levels and millstones, about a man named Reeves in Natchez who was taking to drink, about a bishop passing through to Baton Rouge and the charity he had collected, like manna but counted in coins. 8 prime, Mr. Parrish said suddenly around a bite. Heard that was the number. That true, Vance? Rule's hand did not move. The blade stayed at its patient angle, its edge resting in the shallow lake of juice. Mr. Vance dabbed his lips with a napkin as if the question were a fruit he could choose to taste or not. "You know how numbers are," he said. "They mean what the teller needs. Or what the buyer wants," one of the Caldwell brothers said, and he laughed like a nail breaking. The quiet man from Natchez took a small breath and set his fork down without looking at it. "Accounts," he said again, almost to himself. Aurelia said, "Rule," the way she did when she wanted to feel the control of his name. "That slice you set aside, bring it to me." Rule set the blade flat and lifted the plate he kept for the mistress. His fingers were steady as stones in a riverbed. He laid meat before her like a gift and then returned to his post and raised the knife again. He felt the vein in his wrist beat against the bone handle. He waited for the talk to roll again so he could be only a steady hand. But this time it did not roll right. Mr. Vance turned his face to rake Hardy near the sideboard and said in a voice that was not loud but had a plank edge to it, "After we eat, see to it that the woman from the laundry and the houseman go to the road crate. I want them clean and presentable. We have guests, and I believe Mr. Parrish would like to inspect Prime." The blade in Rule's hand did something he had not allowed it to do in many months. It trembled. It trembled like a horse that had heard thunder far off, too far for anyone else at the table to know but not too far for the horse. He pressed the flat of the blade to the meat to hide the tremor. Prime. Woman from the laundry. Houseman. Mira. Himself. Aurelia said, softly, "Caleb." It was the kind of voice that asked the river to hold still in its banks. He did not look at her. He did not look at Rule either. He lifted his watch and set it on the table in a little ceremony and looked into its face as if the watch had something to say about how long flesh took to separate from what held it together. Rule's body did something then that no one saw. He drew breath and tied it to a choice. He tied it to a line he had carved in soot and hid in grease. He tied it to his name written small along a knothole where mice sometimes clean their whiskers. He lifted the blade and set it down again, not to cut but to point, the tip toward the end of the table where Mr. Parrish smiled with his hayseed teeth and the Caldwell brothers had begun to speak in their laugh again. He did not point the blade at a man. He pointed it at the platter so the candlelight ran along the steel and made a path. He said, careful and low, so it might sound like a servant's question about the meat and not anything else, "Shall I turn the roast, sir?" Mr. Vance looked up with surprise because a blade speaks even when a man does not. For a second Rule saw something that was not calculation in the gray of those eyes. It was naked. It was a man seeing that a tool had a mind. Then the moment skinned over. "Yes," he said. "Turn it." Rule turned the roast and with it he turned the room. He set the knife beneath the crusted fat and drew it toward himself, not to cut away but to reveal what lay underneath, a line of rosemary he had laid there that morning like a seam, the herb's scent bright and wild in the heat of the meat. He lifted the rosemary with the blade and laid it on the white of the linen like a word written in green. He laid another and another until the 3 pieces made, to his eye, a letter only someone who had learned from crate marks and soot boards would see, an M. Aurelia's face went still as sugar when it first begins to boil. Rake Hardy saw nothing. He never saw anything that had to do with letters. Mr. Parrish blinked like he had smoke in his eyes. The Natchez man glanced from the herbs to Rule's face and then away, as if accidentally glimpsing a prayer. Rule set the knife back to carving. He cut thin slices with the M glistening on the cloth beside his hand, a mark no one would name. He had meant to do only that, to lay a letter at the table like a seed a bird might find, like a whisper in a field of talk. Anything more would be a shout, and shouts brought whips. But then Mr. Vance said, "Take Mira now," not even bothering to speak around it. "I don't like to watch the cleaning." The room did not change its light. The candles burned, the baby gurgled 2 rooms away, the watch ticked. Rule's hand moved by itself into the juice of the meat and came away resembling a man who had been born to carve. He laid another slice in place and another, and in his head he saw Myra's hands red in the lye water and the way her jaw kept time. He spoke. He did not mean to. It was the kind of speech that comes from a bone and not a mouth. "Sir," he said, and the blade kept on making its quiet path through meat, "the laundry ain't done." The Caldwell brother with the narrower face laughed in a dressmaker's squeak. "Listen at that," he said. "A houseman with opinion." Mr. Vance did not move. "You forget yourself," he said. The words were smooth. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Rule nodded as if he agreed. He set the blade flat. He pressed 2 fingers on its spine as if to make sure it would not leap. "I forget nothing," he said. Quiet. He looked not at the master but at Aurelia. He had never done that at table. "Ma'am," the baby shirt's still wet. Aurelia's eyes flickered like a bird considering a sudden wind. It made something uncertain in her move. She looked down at her plate and then at the rosemary letters like a child seeing a game and not yet sure of its rules. "Rake," Mr. Vance said. The overseer stood. His whip hissed against the chair leg as he rose. Even at table he wore it. He stepped behind Rule and the smell of his clothes, sweat, leather, tobacco, stepped with him. Rule's body knew Rake the way a rabbit knows a hawk shadow. His body wanted to make itself ground. The kitchen taught him another lesson: steam rises. He lifted his head. "You come with me," Rake whispered in his ear, so close Rule felt the words like a spider on skin. "You and the washwoman." "Prime," they said. "We see how prime." Rule looked at the knife. It lay long on the platter, Sabbath bright. His hand could close around it the way water closes around a stone. He saw the path of it in the air like a line he had already drawn on wood. He saw blood. He saw Myra's name on the smokehouse wall and the way the soot filled the cuts until only someone who knew would know. He saw the Natchez man's shiny boots and the way his eyes had flinched toward the letters made of herb. He saw Sibby's cold hands and Benaya's iron song. He saw the baby, who would grow to place a hand on a ledger and never feel the heat of a word catch his skin. He saw a knife turned the wrong way and what it would make of him and of everyone who had ever taught him to move without noise. Rule lifted the knife. But he did not yet, turn it. He turned instead his voice, which had always been a smaller blade he kept hid. "You sell me," he said, still looking at Aurelia, and the room moved like a tent in a sudden draft. "You sell me, and the baby go hungry 3 days while you look for a steady hand at the table. You sell Mira, and the child go cold and take fever. You sell Benaiah, and the plow cut crooked till the rows grow bitter." The Caldwell brothers looked delighted, their narrow faces bright with the promise of sport. Mr. Parrish looked uneasy, like a man whose tooth has begun to ache at the root. The Natchez man reached for his glass and did not drink. Aurelia's lips parted as if a story she had told herself about who she was had misplaced its last line. Rake Hardy lifted the butt of his whip and set it at the base of Rule's spine. He did not hit. He placed it there like a man testing a horse's flank for tremor. "You finished," he breathed. "You finished your words?" Rule did not answer. He set the knife down. He picked up the serving fork like a man whose hands have only ever known conveniences. He placed slices of meat on plates he did not look at. He did what his hands had learned to do because everything else in him was counting. He counted the steps to the hall. He counted the distance from the table to the kitchen door. He counted the knives there, and the door beyond with the bolt that stuck when weather turned damp. "Take them now," Mr. Vance said, and his voice made the room small. "Rake, now." It happens that a house breathes like a body. It inhales guests and noise and the river weather, and then it exhales them. Some walls keep breath. Some let it go. Rule had learned the breathing of this house as if it had a chest and a pulse. When Mr. Vance said now, the house took a breath. And Rule moved when the breath did. He stepped sideways, as if to clear room for Aurelia's plate. He set the fork down. He reached for the platter with the roast as if to carry it toward the sideboard, and then, while Rake's weight shifted from one heel to the other, he slid his hand along the board and found the small stopper Aurelia kept for the decanter when it was not in use. It was on its side, like a sleeping bulb of glass. He palmed it. He made his hand into an extra pocket. He walked. In the hall the light fell sharp through the transom and made a ladder on the floorboards. Rule put his foot between the rungs like a man descending into a well. He heard the table voices in the room behind swell and then pinch down, the way a hive sounds when too many hands go near it at once. He did not run. Running teaches a house where you intend to go. In the kitchen door he met Sibby coming the other way with a dish of greens. She saw his face and her own made a shape he had not seen in many years, not since the winter his mother went down with fever and Sibby had told him to drink water and then slapped his cheek so he would swallow. "What you done?" she asked, the words not accusing but measuring. "Not yet," Rule said. "I ain't done it yet." He put his hand to her elbow and set her aside gently because the greens would spill otherwise, and then he took 3 steps to the hearth and dropped the glass stopper into the ash box where it would look like nothing at all. Behind him, Rake's boots hit the hall like a pair of stones thrown one after the other. "Rule," he called, using the name like a leash. Rule turned. The kitchen was part of his body. It had the knife rack nailed crooked so only he could pull the second one without a skip. It had the door he had planed down last spring so it would not stick in storm weather. It had the window that looked at the fog and knew how to hold light like milk until noon. He felt the kitchen beside him like a friend ready to throw a shoulder under his weight. He moved to the butcher block. He chose a small knife. Not the carver. A boning knife, narrow and shy, a blade that went to work and made no speeches. He wrapped it in a cloth and tucked it in his waistband at his back where his shirt hung loose. He picked up a wooden spoon. Rake came to the doorway. His whip swayed. The Natchez man stood behind him at an angle, not too near, as if his boots did not like the floorboards. "Come on," Rake said. "Bring the washwoman." Sibby said nothing. She set the greens on the board and twisted her apron in her hands until the cloth went tight as a rope and then loosed it again. "You carry nothing for them," she said to Rule, like prayer said in the wrong room on purpose so God could go and fetch it later. Rule held the spoon. He let himself look into Rake's eyes and recognized they're not a man but a habit. He had learned habits. He knew how to bend them until they believed they were bending you. "Yes, sir," he said. They crossed the yard to the laundry where the kettles boiled like witches in a story men tell to make themselves feel braver than they are. Mira stood with her sleeves rolled, steam turning her hair into a slick crown. She did not startle. She looked at Rule like a woman looks at weather, not loving it, not hating it, trying to see which way it moved. "They want you," Rule said. "Be my luck," she said, and lifted the shirt she was working and wrung it until the water fell from it in ropes and then in a rain and then in a mist. The blue of the cloth paled as the lie left it. She hung it on the line and wiped her palms on her skirt. "You carrying?" she asked, looking at his empty hands. "Only myself," he said. Rake led them the short road under the chinaberry trees to the shed by the front lane, the road crate, they called it, a place of staging in 2 doors, one to the road and one back to the yard, with a muddy strip between where wagons stood when they came. He loved to lead people there. The crate's walls were high and its air stank of hemp and old tears. Mira, had been in it once before when Aurelia went north to her sister for a month and wanted the laundry closer to the house. Rule had not been in it. He had walked past it 100 times. "Stand there," Rake said, and set them against the wall where the light fell thin. He pretended the crate was a parlor and he a butler. He liked ceremony more than any master did because ceremony gave his small power a hat to wear. The Natchez man came in behind them and shut the door so the light pinched narrow and then slid into slats. He did not look at their faces. He looked at their hands and then at their wrists as if he were measuring bracelets. "Prime," he said in a voice that wished it could be tired and was not allowed to be. The woman strong. The houseman, steady. Mira put her chin up. "Say my name," she said softly. No one spoke. The kettles in the yard made a sound that crossed the distance like a memory of rain. Rule stood so his shoulder almost touched hers. He felt the boning knife press the small of his back like a finger telling him it could be a word if he wanted. He lifted his hand and scratched his neck to feel it and not feel it. He watched Rake's feet. He watched where the Natchez man's hat brim shadowed his own mouth. "Price," Rake said. "You tell Mr. Vance." The Natchez man did not answer right away. He slipped a notebook from his coat. Rule's eyes took it in like water. The notebook was plain brown. The pencil wore bite marks near the tip. The Natchez man licked the point and wrote the number as if he were making it up from breath and not from people. Rule read it upside down. He felt the number hit him, not like an axe head or a blow, but like a bell. He saw what a man thought of a life when he set a mark beside it. He saw his own letters in the smokehouse wall argue with the pencil in that small book that would drop into a pocket and ride away to Natchez and never know the taste of lion skin. "Come on," Rake said again, and his voice wore the whip. Back to the house. They walked. The air outside felt like a room after someone stops crying and starts to breathe regular. In the yard Finch ran past with a hoop he had stolen and laughed when Mira reached a hand to catch him. Sibby put a hand to her chest and let it fall. Benaya's hammer told time. Even the river, a gray ribbon beyond the sycamores, looked like something a man could write a sentence on if he had the right pen. At the kitchen door, Rule let his hand fall to the spilled bin and in the scrape of flour on what he drew with his finger a letter that would not last. Mira stepped on it and it vanished. But he felt the trace remain under her heel like a blessing or a map. "Don't go to the crate again," he said low. "My feet take me where they made to," she said. "Then we make them different," he said, and heard how crazy that sounded when a house breeds the way this one did and men write in books about where other people's feet will go. He heard Benaya's parables. He heard his mother's voice when there was not enough. It had always been enough for him to live, somehow. He heard the watch tick in the dining room and the baby laugh and then choke and then laugh again, the way babies do when they discover their breath. The afternoon bent toward a storm. The fog had left behind a sky the color of pewter polished thin. The river began to go bristle where the wind laid a hand on it. Rule moved in the kitchen like a man mending a sail, fast when he needed to be, still when he must. He kept the knife near. He felt the small blade at his back like a question he would be asked and would answer when the time was exactly right and not before. Toward evening Mr. Vance sent for Rule. He went with the steadiness that had become his armor. He found the master in his office with the ledger open and the quiet Natchez man near the window like a hired shadow. Aurelia stood by the hearth, her hand on the mantel, her fingers white where they pinched the wood. "Rule," Mr. Vance said. "You know what a ledger is." Rule looked at the page. The letters did not pretend to be picture marks anymore, they were what they were. He knew the word ledger from the crate marks on molasses and from the chalk on the tally board in the smokehouse and from the back of Benaya's hand where he had written a date once and washed it off after sundown. "I know numbers," he said. "I know how they hold." "Good," Mr. Vance said, and his mouth made a smile that did not reach the skin of his eyes. "You will write a list for me." He tapped the page. "You will write the names of those we will move 2 weeks from Saturday. You will bring it to me, neat. You have the neat hand for fine work." Aurelia flinched like the word neat had slapped her. The Natchez man's boot made a small sound. Perhaps his toe had found a splinter. Rule tasted ash. He held his hands where he could see them, as if they might do something without him if he did not keep their faces turned toward his eyes. "Yes, sir," he said. "Tonight," Mr. Vance said. "Before you sleep." The sky broke right as he left the office. Lightning stood up in the field like a man in a white shirt, and thunder shook the stair rail under his palm. The rain came down thick and frank. Rule went to the kitchen and shut the door and set the bolt and sat on the stool near the hearth. He took the pen from the place under the flour bin where he kept the little knife. He had inky made from walnut hulls because Sibby once said the baby liked to draw leaves and Rule had said leaves need a stem, and she had saved the lie he told her like a seed in her apron and given him a bowl to boil the holes and say it was for stain. He set a scrap of paper on the board. Rain hammered the shingles. He could smell the wet rope of the old ferry line swinging in the wind and slapping the bank. He wrote a word, names. He stared at it. He wrote another, Mira. He wrote, Benaiah. He wrote, Rule. Then he sat and watched the words in the candlelight until the edges of the letters blurred. He put the pen down. He picked up the boning knife. He set its point to the board and felt the wood receive it. He drew letters there, in the place where flour always spilled and grease always went, where any marking would be dust by morning. He carved the letter he had laid on the linen, M, he carved a B. He carved an R. He felt each cut like a footstep in a place where no man had been allowed to walk. The storm passed. The river calmed to a hiss. In the quarters, children cried and then were hushed and then cried again. Rule stood. He blew out the candle. He tucked the paper in the pocket he had stitched into the lining of his shirt where no one's hand ever went. He set the knife where it could leap into his palm in the dark. He slept in fits. He dreamed he was carving meat and the meat turned to rope and the rope turned to letters and the letters turned to water that would not hold him. He woke with the taste of walnut ink in his mouth. The rooster in the yard counted dawn. Rule rose. The day of lists is different than other days. Its weather is made by men, not sky. Rule felt that when he lifted the kettle and the water inside sounded like someone pacing in the hall. He kept his hands busy. He kept his eyes soft so no one would fear them. He fed the fire with wood that did not smoke. He tasted the stew and added salt. He did everything correct so anyone watching would see a man with no extra corners. He went to the smokehouse. He slid the door. He knelt. He put his ear to the board like a doctor to a chest. He felt for mice. He felt for the memory of letters. He drew with the knife and the grease a map that would not last long enough to betray them, a line from the crate to the china bears to the ditch behind Benaiah's shed to the bend where the ferry used to pull. He marked an X for where the rope lay. He marked an O for where the water was shallow even when the river rose. He considered who could swim and who could not. He considered the way a heavy dress holds a woman down and the way a child's breath goes if you talk too much near his mouth while the river is cold. He wiped the board clean with his palm and let the grease shine as if nothing had happened there. Mira came with the basket for smoke salt. She stood in the doorway like a statement. He turned to her. "If I ask you to run," he said, "what you say?" "I ask you which way," she said. He nodded. It was the right answer. It was the only one his body could hold without breaking. He pressed his mouth tight and then loosed it because you cannot hold a mouth like a fist for long. 2 weeks from Saturday, he said. Ledger say so. She looked at him for a long time and then passed him to the hanging hams and the hooks that gleamed in the dark. They write the weather, she said. We bring the rain. He wanted to take her hand. He did not. He put a pinch of salt in the palm she held out and their fingers touched like two notes of a song that only plays when the door is shut. In the yard Finch rolled his hoop into the wind until it came back into him and knocked him on his back and he laughed and the laugh caught Rake's attention and the man's eyes turned and the moment passed. Rule felt the shape of luck in the way it sometimes wears a child's clatter so men look one way while something else walks by. That night he wrote the names again. He added Sibby and then crossed it and then did not cross it because crossing a name on paper is not the same as crossing it in the reel, and sometimes the reel follows the ink anyway. He wrote Finch in small letters and put a dot between each letter like dots could cut a boy into parts small enough to hide in pockets. He folded the paper and put it away. 2 days after, the Natchez man came back with men who carried rope that did not look like the old ferry line and crates that did not smell of sugar or molasses but of iron. They talked low. Rake moved in a circle around them like a dog wearily proud of the yard he patrolled. Mr. Vance visited the quarters in the afternoon and stood with his watch in his hand and asked Benaiah about the plow and asked Mira about the lie and then looked at Rule and said, "How are your hands?" "Useful steady," Rule said, "because sometimes you must put a mirror in a man's mouth so he sees his own face accidentally." Mr. Vance smiled the small smile that was his and turned away. That night Rule went to the ferry bend. He went alone. He took the boning knife and a coil of new line he had found in the back of the shed where the plowshares lived, and he set his hands to the old rope like a man greeting an elder. The old line had barnacles of mud hardened in it. He dug at them until his fingernails tore, and then he used the small knife to pick them, and he hummed to himself not a song but a length of breath that could catch at any time and become running. He found the anchor point beneath the bank, the old iron loop set into rock. He set the new line through it and tested the weight with his body. The river spoke its own old language, the one men ignore until it takes a house from its bank and puts it 2 fields over. He leaned his weight into the line and felt it talk back. It would hold 3 at a time if they went slow and if no one panicked and if the water did not rise in spite because the moon said so. Someone stepped behind him. He turned with the knife low, not to show it but to feel it ready. Benaiah stood there like a stump that had decided to walk for once. The old man's hair had gone white so slow that no one remembered it any other color. "You making a bridge?" Benaiah said. "Or a noose?" "Bridge," Rule said. "If the river say so." "The river don't care for men," Benaiah said, "not unkind. But it hate ropes more than men do. It goes slack when you need, and tight when you don't." He took the line in his hand and gave it a tug like testing a horse's teeth. "You gon' tell them?" "When it time," Rule said. "I tell who I can trust with a rope." Benaiah made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. Trust is a piece of iron you think you forged yourself, and then one day you see the mold mark and remember somebody else made it. "You trust me?" Rule looked at him in the moonlight. "Yes," he said. "You taught me to make a blade sing." "I taught you to hear it," Benaiah said. "That different." He took the other end of the line and tied a knot Rule did not know. When a thing pull wrong, this let go in the right way. Don't pull it unless you mean to jump. They stood quiet a while after. The river talked. The wind went through the sycamores like a hand sifting rice. Somewhere a dog barked and then got embarrassed at himself and lay down. Rule put his palm on the rough of the old rope like blessing a grave. He tied the new line off and hid the loose under the bank where a man would have to kneel in the mud to find it. The day before Saturday of 2 weeks, Mr. Vance told Aurelia to pack. She went upstairs and laid dresses across the bed and then sat down and put her face in her hands. Rule saw her in the mirror while he dusted the baseboard and turned away so she would not feel the mirror noticing. The baby tugged at his pocket and found the stub of pencil he kept there and drew on the floor until the nurse took it away. "No marks," she said to the child in a voice that meant, "for now." Rule put the pencil back and thought of the smokehouse wall so black with grease that light. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Light would not sit on it. He finished the thought in his head because the house would not let him speak it out loud. Light would not sit on grease any more than truth sits on a book that lies. Morning came mean and bright, the way some mornings do when a thing has already been decided by men who shave while thinking about it. Rule woke to the crunch of wagon boards shifting and the hush of dresses being folded upstairs. He rose from his pallet with the taste of iron in his mouth and went to the hearth. He fed the coals, coaxed them until they breathed orange. The kitchen answered him with its usual loyalties: spoon, pot, knife, board, old friends that had kept him alive because they needed a steady hand to be what they were. He kept the boning knife tucked at the small of his back. He kept the carving knife bright because brightness is a kind of mask. He checked the door latch twice, the window thrice, the ash box once more, and then he set to boiling coffee and baking hoe cakes so thin the edges browned like paper. By mid-morning, Mr. Vance's watch had become the loudest thing in the house. Rake Hardy walked loops in the yard as if wearing a rut could count as work. The Natchez man stayed near the porch post, hat low, eyes that kept wanting to look where they should not. Aurelia moved like a woman who thought every object might be the one to keep her from drowning if only she lifted it right. The baby fussed and slept and fussed again. Rule moved meat to the smokehouse and, in the shadow there, touched the board where his letters lived under soot. He set his forehead to it. The wood was cool against skin that burned with thoughts that had no room in a man. He whispered the map he had drawn and wiped away. He whispered the names, Mira, Benaiah, Finch, Sibby. Rule. A man sang his own name as if it were the name of a friend he was afraid to lose. Noon came harsh. Shadows bled away. The river shone like glass that had learned to say no. Rake called in voices he saved for such days, bring him. He sounded almost cheerful, as if a game had come round again and he liked winning it. Rule stepped into the yard with the carving knife in his right hand, the boning blade hidden like a question along his spine, and the paper list stitched inside his shirt where numbers could not betray a mouth. The wagon sat with its canvas rolled and the crate door unlatched to show its black mouth. The Natchez man stood by, pencil behind his ear, as if he had to be careful not to write what he was seeing by accident. He moved as he had planned, slow, sure, each step rehearsed in breath while lying awake. He went to Mira first. He knelt as if to fix the hem. He slipped the little bundle Sibby had made into her palm. He slid the edge along the rope hidden at her cuff until the rope sighed and came apart like an old lie. He let the cut ends fall where the shadow would draw them down. When I turn the knife, he said, not looking at her mouth. Which way? She asked, not moving her eyes. Follow the rope, he said, and stood, and made a servant's small bow that meant nothing to men and everything to her. Rake had a talent for showing his teeth when he thought he owned a person's next step. He showed them now, small and pleased. Up you go, he said to Mira, tapping the plank with his boot. Benaiah leaned in the smithy shade with his hand in his shirt as if feeling for a heartbeat that was not his. Sibby's apron was clean, she had done that on purpose this morning, as if the day would see how clean she was and turn polite. Finch squatted beside the china-bearer stump with a hoop on his knees and his face arranged into boredom so perfected it was art. Rule lifted the carving knife so the sun made a long bright line out of it. He heard the house take its breath. He turned the knife, and with it he turned the day. Canvas fell, rope parted, Mira ran low as a field fox, skirts in one hand and the other reaching for the air as if it were another hand she trusted. The Caldwell brothers' laugh cut off like a string pulled from a fiddle. Rake's whip sprang up with the sound of a snake learning its name. Mr. Vance said now, but the word broke because the porch board under his heel gave. That old split Rule had watched all spring. Rule did not watch the whip. He watched Myra's back and the little white mark on her neck where Lai had kissed her once, and he felt the pull of the line beyond the china-bearers, the way a tied thing hums in the bones of a man who set the knot. He turned his own body to block the lane between Rake and that running back, and when the whip came he did not try to own it, he let it talk to the carving knife. Steel met leather with a sound like a word cut in half. The lash's tip struck his wrist and left fire there, the blade shaved a breath from the thong and turned it aside so it snapped a fence post instead of a spine. Rake stumbled. Surprise took his mouth like a hand. He came again, quick now. He meant to open someone. He chose Rule because he could not forgive him for being steady without his permission. The second strike would have landed where men do not walk again, but Rule stepped in, not back, and so the lash had no room to run. His left hand found Rake's wrist the way you find the riverbank in the dark when you have learned the path by your feet. His right hand kept the carving knife high and bright and useless looking, as if this were only a conversation. Don't, Rule said, soft as air over a kettle. It was not a plea. Aurelia's voice came thin from the porch. Caleb. Not a command. A crack in a word a woman had relied on too long. Rake snarled because snarling had kept him fed. He wrenched his wrist and made the whip a rope. He meant to snare an ankle. He forgot that men who carve learn grain. Rule turned his heel, let the rope slide against his shin where bone could take it, and brought the bright knife down not on flesh but on the handle's thong. The lash came away from its keeper like a snake shedding skin. Rake staggered. A man without his tail is a different kind of animal. Run! Finch's voice, bright bird, from nowhere and everywhere. Children are the bravest when bravery looks like a game. Then the yard became the sort of picture a painter would lie about later. Mira threw the china bears like a swallow shot low, Finch bolting after her with his hoop carried like a shield, Benaiah peeling himself from shade, not fast but in a straight line that led between danger and the water, Sibby at the kitchen door, hands to her mouth, then down, then out as if ready to gather the whole day and stuff it in her apron. Rule moved with the day he had made. He threw the carving knife, not at a man, but into the crate's door where the hinge bolt lived. Steel bit wood. The door swung crooked and stuck like a drunk's mouth. The wagon horse startled at the sudden slap of canvas and set its feet wide, eyes rolling. The Natchez man put his hands up without knowing why, as if surrender were a habit he had mistaken for manners. Rake lunged, empty-handed and unforgiving. Rule felt him coming the way you feel the first drop of a storm. He let his body be a hinge, he pivoted. The overseer's weight carried itself into the side of the crate. Rule did not need to see the back of Rake's head strike the jam to know it had. He heard that dull, private sound and looked away. Some sounds a man can only bear if he does not look at their faces. "Stop them!" Mr. Vance shouted, but something had frayed in his voice. Men like him require the world to agree with them at once. When it does not, their words sound like a watch that cannot find its tick. The Caldwell brothers ran as if joy were a spur. Mr. Parrish held himself back, hands half raised, the way cowards often do when two futures stand in front of them and both look like loss. The Natchez man's boots wanted to move and did not. He looked at Rule the way a man looks at a dog that has learned how to open a latch. Rule took the boning knife into his hand. This blade did not throw well, and he did not intend to test it. He ran, not to the china bears. He ran to the side yard where the laundry kettles sat like thrones and tipped the smaller one with his hip. A sluice of hot water dashed across the packed earth and made mud. He grabbed the second and tipped it too. Steam rose like a warning. The Caldwell with the squeak hit that patch at a sprint and his legs forgot how to be legs. He slid knee first and made a sound only pride makes when it gets cut. Rule did not look back. He ran the path only his feet knew, past the wash line where baby shirts flapped and then clung, past the ash pile, past the shed with the new plowshare that would go dull if Benaiah were taken. He counted 7 breaths because 7 is how a man finds a calm inside a noise. He reached the china bears and put a hand to the first trunk as if asking permission to pass. The tree gave what trees give, nothing and everything at once. Mira reached the ditch behind the smithy. Benaiah had laid a plank there 2 nights ago like an old man laying down a memory for the young to step on. She crossed with her skirt in her teeth and her arms out. Finch leapt without touching wood at all, boy that he was. Rule came after and heard Rake behind him again, recovered and furious, whipless but not witless. Some men can smell rebellion like a dog smells meat. At the bend the old ferry line lay where he had found it. The new line was threaded through, hidden low under the bank where fingers turned to mud to reach it. Mira slid down first, knees going dirty in a way no ledger would forgive. She felt for the rope with her hands. Her face made no noise. Finch came to his belly and found the line with both hands at once and giggled because he had never held a river like that before. Rule dropped, added his weight to theirs, and the line answered the way a saved word answers when spoken aloud. Behind them boots came, and curses, a storm of feet and spit and sky-small men. There, a Caldwell voice, happy as a fox at a hen door. A shot cracked. Bark leapt from a sycamore and into the water with a soft salute. The river did not care about men's fireworks. It kept being itself, wide and bright and ready to drown hope if hope forgot to breathe. "Go," Rule said. Hand over hand. Mira set her mouth and moved. Finch laughed and then remembered and swallowed the sound and moved like a small animal in a hollow. Rule pushed off. The water took his legs and loved them too much. Cold climbed him like a slow animal and set teeth in his ribs. He kept his breath measured, his hands sure, his eyes on the opposite bank that looked farther away now that it was possible. Another shot. The bullet took water and made it spit. Rule felt the line shiver. He thought of Benaya's knot and tied his faith to it because faith is a kind of knot when rope burns skin. He did not pray, exactly. He did what he always had, he listened for a sound that would tell him the truth underneath the noise. Aurelia's voice floated down the slope, thin, more wind than words. Caleb. Rake reached the bank and slid down on his side because anger is poor at climbing. He grabbed for the line. His hand closed on it and the whole river found out at once that a man it did not love had come to hold it. The rope sang. Rule felt the note in his forearms. He looked over his shoulder and saw the overseer's mouth open on a word that wanted to be a name and wasn't. Benaya appeared at the edge above like a tree deciding to walk after all. He had a hammer in his hand because he always had. He did not raise it. He put his foot on the line, not hard, just enough. He did not look at Rake. He looked at the knot and then at Rule and then he took his foot off and said, as if to himself, now. Rule pulled the knot Benaya had taught him. The river answered. The section Rake had taken slack on went slack all at once. He splashed sideways, arms pinwheeling, caught himself on a root. He cursed, a small man's curse, made of teeth. He scrambled, caught the line again. This time he caught it where Rule's hands would feel it. The rope told the truth, there was too much weight for what it had meant to hold. Let go, Mira called, eyes on Rule. He did not. He gave. There's a difference. He let the river have a hand's length and then took it back and then gave it again, the way you talk a skittish thing into trusting you with a hurt paw. Finch moved faster, light as a word no one has shouted yet. Mira moved like a woman who had decided not to die that day. Rule moved like a man who knew he might. The Caldwell with the squeak took aim. Mr. Parrish said, "Don't, because sometimes a mouth says what a heart will not," and the gun went high. The shot whined through sycamore leaves and found a branch that had been dead a season. It fell and struck the water between Rule and the far bank and made a sound like a hand slapping a child to wake him from a nightmare. They reached the shallows where stones showed their backs like animals come to drink. Mira stood first and turned, shoulders ready as if the river might step back up and ask for what it had lent. Finch stood second and laughed a bubble out of his nose because boys are built of laughter even when they are crossing death. Rule stood last and felt the line drag against his palm, and then it went light, and he knew Rake had lost it. They scrambled up. The bank on that side was not theirs but it held just the same. Cane and willow made a fence that gave and gave until you were through. Rule pushed Mira ahead and lifted Finch when the boy's foot went into a hole that was not there the minute before. Behind them, voices swore and Rake coughed and the Caldwell laughed because he did not know any other sound to make when his hands were empty. They ran the deer path Benaya had named without naming. It led to the old pecan stand and, beyond that, the narrow track the ferryman had used to bring a skiff through Cane when he did not want the world to see him. It was there Rule drew them off the path and into a pocket of ground where sound bent around you and did not come back out the way it went in. "Breathe here," he said. "Breathe even." Mira bent with her hands on her knees and did as told. Finch flopped on his back and made angels and leaves without meaning to. Rule sank down and lay his head against the dirt to listen for boots. He heard them, faint, and he heard something else, Benaya's hammer, far away, counting time for men who were not there. The Natchez man's boots did not come. Rule noticed the absence like a blank spot in a ledger. He wondered if that was mercy or bookkeeping. They moved when the wind moved. They learned the wind's language quick because lives were speaking in it. The river bent behind them into quiet. The day bloomed into late afternoon, the hour when birds test the air to see if night will be kind. They folded themselves into shadow and shape until the world forgot to look hard. By sundown they reached the place Benaya had told a story about, Never a map, only a story. Old levee tumbled long ago, stump like a man's shoulder, spring that tastes of iron and acorn. The spring was there. The stump leaned like an old soldier who had set his back to a wall he trusted. They drank. Water tasted like a long word said slow. We can't go back for Sibby, Finch said suddenly, sitting up so fast the leaves made a sound like pages. We can't go back, can we? Rule closed his eyes and opened them. Not now, he said. We keep her name in our mouths until our feet can carry it the right way. Mira put her hand on Finch's hair and pressed his head gently down again. We make a place, she said. A place hold the names till the bodies come. They slept in fits, listening with their whole skin. Fox barked. Bart Owl said to darkness that already knew. Somewhere in the distance men's voices tangled and untangled like rope around feet that didn't know what they were tied to. Morning found them with cold on their teeth. Rule woke to the sound of cane talking to itself. He lifted his head. Benaiah stood there, not hiding, as if he had been part of the stand all along and only now remembered to be a man again. He carried a sack over one shoulder and a wrapped bundle under the other. He looked at Mira first, then at Finch, then at Rule as if counting had to end somewhere. How? Rule asked, getting to his feet. You made them busy, Benaiah said. I made them tired. He nodded to the bundle and set it down. Inside was bread wrapped in an old shirt, side meat cut thin, a small tin of salt, a stub of candle, a tinderbox, and, Rule's breath hitched, the green felt sleeve. He opened it and found the carving knife. You can't, he began, and Benaiah held a palm up. Aurelia set it down in shock, the old man said. She forgot what the bright was for. I remembered. Rule wrapped the bone handle with a strip of cloth torn from the old shirt. We don't cut men with it, he said. Benaiah shrugged one shoulder. Knives decide that sometimes. He looked past Rule. More coming. They listened. Through cane came two figures, Sibby first, stubborn, leaning on another woman Rule didn't know well. Her hair was wild like someone young had tried to braid it while running. Behind them, not close, the Natchez man stood with his hat in his hands like a sinner at a river baptism. Sibby swatted the air near Rule's head as if disciplining a fly. You run without telling me, I run without telling you, she said, breath small, words large. Don't start thinking you the only one who ever had a plan. Rule laughed and then his laugh folded into a sound he did not let out very often because it made a man think he could break and still be a man. He put his hands on her shoulders and then let them fall because touching can be too much when air already weighs more than it should. The Natchez man did not step into the pocket. He stayed a pace back like a man at the edge of a fire who wants to be warm but fears smelling like smoke later. I didn't see you, he said to Rule, not a lie, not the truth. If anyone asks, I saw Fox in a hoop. He looked at Finch, and something like shame passed through his face and was gone. They'll hunt 3 days and then drink and then lie about what they almost did. He put his hat back on. West, he said. Keep the sun on your left shoulder in the morning. There's cane old as God where men won't walk. After that, you'll find people who don't ask names until you choose to give them. He swallowed. I never said this. What's your name? Finch asked, because boys still believe names can make promises. The man hesitated. Doesn't matter, he said. Just don't use it if you hear it. He tipped his hat and was gone, taken by Kane, boots not making the sound boots usually make when they leave trouble. They moved west because the day said so. They learned the Kane's logic and how to follow leaf alignment like reading a sentence no white mouth had written. They ate little and spoke less. Rule's wrist burned where the lash had kissed him. Sibby wrapped it with a poultice from the bundle she had given back to him, as if care were a thing that cycles like seasons. On the third day, the ground lifted into a ridge that held the river's old bones. Beyond it lay a cypress break with knees like prayer and water flat as a held breath. Birds they did not know named them strangers and then shrugged. In the center, on a slightly higher place, sat 3 huts built of cane and mud and a roof made out of somebody's long-ago sail. A woman stepped out, long-backed, with a boy on her hip and a knife at her belt. Behind her, a man with hair gone copper-gray came into the doorway. They looked at Rule's group and did not startle. They looked like people who had once decided to live and then remembered they had to keep deciding every morning. "You hungry?" the woman said. It was not a question. "We looking to be less hunted," Benaiah said, setting down his sack like a peace offering. "Plenty of that here," the copper-haired man said. "I'm Caswell. This is Firth. That little one is nobody yet, we waiting to see who he is before naming him." Rule stepped forward. "Rule," he said. "Mira. Finch. Sibby. Benaiah." He hesitated and then added, "Others may come." "They do," Firth said. "Some stay. Some pass on and find a different quiet." She cut fish with the easy confidence of a person who had carved more than meat in her time. "You can put your bones in the shadow until they stop shaking. After that we find what your hands know." Rule's hands knew knives and heat and how to make bread rise in a stingy hearth and how to turn a number into a reason, and he gave all of that to this place. Days became a kind of music again, not sweet, but true. He taught Finch to cut cane at a slant so rain ran off. He watched Mira learn to set snares so clean the rabbit never panicked. He listened to Benaiah talk to another old man about mourning doves and how they will roost where they are welcome and go where they are not with no argument at all. He took the carving knife to a cypress knee and made it a tool that meant shelter instead of table. He carved marks where no ledger would find them, lines that meant path and circles that meant water, and a little green M he laid into a woven mat near the entrance like a promise that letters would mean living here and not price. Sometimes at night, Rule felt the breath of pursuit pass over the break, thin as smoke. Men came to the edge and cursed and left because the land did not want them. Once, Rake's voice reached into the cypress like a bad dream a body remembers in its stomach after the head has forgotten. He called names wrong on purpose, his favorite sport. The break did not answer him. Aurelia came once, or else a wind made of memory did. Rule dreamed her on the far bank, barefoot, holding her shoes in one hand and the ledger in the other, asking out loud what a list had ever promised that a mouth could believe. He woke to the sound of owls debating the moon and could not say whether the dream had been a lie trying to be mercy. Years do what years do when men don't own them. They gather and they scatter. Rule became the man people asked without using words. He knew where the rope lay under the bank and how to lay another without leaving a mark. He knew which herbs said fever go down and which said hunger wait. He knew how to tell a boy when to laugh and when to swallow it. They built more huts. People came by ones and twos. Some stayed until their names felt double in their mouths, the old name and the new, and then they moved on, carrying both. The place gathered stories like a smokehouse gathers salt. One winter a woman came with a baby who could not stop coughing. Mira took the child and put her mouth to the small ribs and breathed slow and steady, the way Rule had told her men breathed before turning knives. The baby learned that pattern and lived. The woman stayed. She could spin, and the break learned to wear shirts that did not chafe. In spring, the river rose and tried to take their houses into itself. Rule argued with it in the only language rivers respect. He moved what could move, let what could not go, and promised to build back higher. The break nodded and let them. Then came a day that smelled like change the way a field smells like rain 2 counties away. Finch returned from a scouting path with his mouth tight and his eyes wide. "Riders," he said. 6. And a wagon. Not like last time. Rule felt his bones listen. He put his hand on the carving knife out of habit and then took it away because not all troubles are met with steel. He signaled. The camp folded itself like hands, quiet, practiced. Benaiah took the children to the low where ferns make noise for men, hiding the right kind of sound. Mira stood beside Rule with her chin up and her jaw counting. The riders did not come into the break. They stopped at the edge where dry ground tries to convince wet ground to change its mind. At their head was the Natchez man. He looked older by a winter or 5. He raised one hand, palm out, no gun. He waited. Rule stepped to the edge where voice carries but bullet hates to guess. You found nothing, he said, offering the man a future. The Natchez man nodded like a man who had walked a long way alongside a lie and was too tired to push it uphill anymore. Paper says a house burned, he said. Ledger went with it. That paper says it for reasons not mine. I came to bring word and leave it. He looked past Rule into shade and names he had decided not to know. The man called Hardy left. He liked killing more than counting. Men like that don't retire, they only get lost. Rule felt a knot he had not trusted himself to admit loosen below his ribs and then tie itself again because loosening is not the same as safety. Why tell me? He asked. The man looked at his hands on the saddle horn. Because I am tired of pretending numbers are innocent. He reached into his coat and pulled a small parcel, wrapped in oiled cloth. He laid it on a stump within reach. Someone thought you might need this. Rule did not move until the riders had turned and the brake had swallowed their hoarse sounds like sugar and tea. He stepped forward. He opened the parcel. Inside lay a small book with a brown paper cover and pages thick as hunger. A graphite pencil sat through its spine like a skewer through meat. It was not a ledger. It was blank. Mira came to his shoulder. We can write the weather, she said, half-smile. Or at least say what it did to us and what we did back. Rule set the book on the stump and ran his thumb over the first page. He had carved on walls and boards and in grease where light would not sit. He had drawn M and herb and watched it wilt to green memory on linen no one would admit had been marked. He had learned letters by theft and nerve and kindness stolen from rebuke. Now a page lay without telling him who he was. He wrote a word, names. He wrote, Sibby. He wrote, Benaiah. He wrote, Mira. He wrote, Finch. He wrote others, and left lines for those who had come and those who would. He did not write prices, because he did not know any anymore and would not learn them again. On a summer night years later, when the brake had begun to feel like old country, Rule sat with the carving knife across his knees and the little book open to a page with grease on it from fingers that had cooked and fed and refused to starve. Children, some as blood and some not, lay drowsy in the doorway where Breeze found them. Mira sat on a stool, feet bare, hair unafraid. Benaiah snored very softly the way old men do when their bodies finally accept that someone else is listening for danger now. Rule thought of a table at Vance's Ferry and a roast that had glistened under light that did not know what it was asking him to be. He thought of turning a knife and turning a life. He thought of poor men who measured their days by other men's watches and rich men who forgot their watches could fall. He thought of Aurelia's hands on the rail and a ledger that burned and a baby whose shirts had once been wet and who might somewhere be a man who had chosen to count something else. He stood, sudden with decision. He took the carving knife and, with the care of a man who had used it to both feed enemies and save friends, he set its tip to the door lintel of their largest hut. He carved slow. Children lifted their heads. Mira watched with the quick, proud softness she had for him when he remembered to be a person and not a plan. He carved a letter. M, he carved another. B, he carved another. R, he did not hide them in knots. He made them plain and square and steady. He stepped back. Names, he said to the children. And what they stand for. He pointed to the M, Mira, who ran when running was the only path that told the truth. He pointed to the B, Benaiah, who taught a rope to forget a man. He pointed to the R, Rule, who learned letters and then made them do something besides sell his friends. Finch, taller now and only pretending to be a boy, grinned and said, "We need more wood," because he had learned what it meant to keep a joke alive inside a hard world. They laughed. They told a story the way river water tells one when it finds a rock it likes. They ate fish and cornbread in a stew that tasted of wild things that had not wanted to be eaten and had forgiven them anyway. Night put its hand over their eyes like a mother saying hush. Far away, men counted something else. Maybe cotton, maybe money, maybe days left in a war that had been born before any of them. Rule did not know. He knew a break where children could laugh without swallowing it. He knew a book with names and blank pages. He knew a knife that had been turned and had not forgotten what it once had cut. When he slept, he dreamed not of ledgers but of a table where every plate held the same and every hand that carved did so for the one beside it. In the dream, light sat easy on everything. He woke with tears in his mouth and did not wipe them away. Seasons kept their appointments. Years did not. Word came like bird flight that Vance's ferry had changed hands and names and then burned and then grown again, as places do when men pretend they are the ones who decide. Rule listened and let the words pass through him. He was busy with weather and ropes and a boy who had finally told them his name and it suited him. In a late autumn, when the break was a theater of russet and pewter, Rule went to the old ferry bend alone. He took no knife. He took the little book. He sat where the rope had once hummed in his bones. He wrote 2 more names, Aurelia. Caleb. He set the book in his lap and looked at the words for a long time. He did not cross them out. He did not bless them. He let them be part of the weather. "You see me," a voice said, thin on the far bank. It was not a ghost. Aurelia stood there, older, hat in hand, dressed practical in a way money's wives learn when the world turns without asking them. A young man stood behind her with a child on his shoulders. The child clapped at the river's gleam like a new coin. "I see you," Rule said. It was enough. She looked down at the water and then up again. "I've come to say we're leaving," she said. "Going north. I am not asking forgiveness." "Good," Rule said. He almost smiled. "I don't give it." She nodded. "I thought so." The young man murmured something to the child. Aurelia's mouth softened in a way Rule remembered and wished he did not. "I brought this," she said, and held up an object wrapped in cloth. "But perhaps it belongs to the river now." She set it on the water and the cloth opened like a flower, and the thing inside was that watch with the chain that had winked at supper tables. The river took it without noise. Time, unhooked, sank. Aurelia looked at Rule a long moment and then turned and went. The young man followed. The child looked back, waved a hand that did not know what it was waving to. Rule lifted his hand and then let it fall. He sat until the river told him night had come and it was his turn to speak to the dark so the children would not be alone with it. He rose and walked the path home. The break received him. When Rule was old, he carved less and spoke more, not with big words but with the kind people can carry and not drop. He taught boys to listen to knots and girls to count heartbeats when a baby struggled. He taught everyone who wanted to learn what a ledger had meant and why a blank page meant more, and he never closed the book in a way that would make a child fear it. The carving knife hung by the door, bone handle polished by hands that remembered too much and forgave what they could. He turned it some nights in the lamplight and saw his face not as a servant in polished steel but as a man who had laid his name where light could sit. On the day he died, the break was quiet. Mira held his hand. Finch stood in the door, big now, shoulders like promise. Benaiah had gone into the part of the world old men go to when it is tired of them and they of it. Rule's breath went easy and then easier and then it was only the room breathing, and Mira said a verse plain enough for a child. On the lintel above the door, the letters waited. M.B.R. Children touched them when they came in, a habit like washing hands. The little book lay on the table, open to a page with more names than space. Someone had written small along the bottom where there was no line left, and those we ain't yet met. At dusk they carried him to the old ferry bend, where rope hums had taught him about courage. They put him back to the earth that had held his feet. Mira set the carving knife in the ground at his head and then lifted it again and smiled into her own surprise. "No," she said to the break, to the river, to the night. "We use it." She hung it back by the door when she returned, because some tools belong among the living. The break breathed. Children laughed. Men argued about fish. Women argued about beans. Night critters paid no mind because nothing eats laughter here but hunger, and hunger left when people counted names instead of pounds. The last thing Rule learned was simple and came too late to use but not too late to teach: a knife turned is not a weapon. It is a lever. It lifts what you thought could not be moved, the hinge of a day, the weight of a name, the lid of a future, and once lifted, there is room for light to sit. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.